The verse we're using to springboard off of is found in Romans chapter 15, verse 4. It says, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through endurance and the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. The stories written in the Old Testament of the Bible were written to enable us to persevere. So we will read about the accounts of individuals who received promises from God, and they had to wait a period of time before they actually obtained those promises. They had to persevere, and that's what hope is about. It spans the gap between our faith in what happens and when we receive it. Sometimes to see something, it's helpful to see its opposite. We looked at individuals who persevered. We're going to look at somebody who didn't and see what we can learn from him. Jeroboam is a king who earned a place in the Bible Hall of Shame. We won't find an Israelite king who did more damage than Jeroboam. Let's look at his legacy first, and then we'll try to figure out how in the world did this happen. So let's look at his legacy first. It says that Nadab, son of Jeroboam, did evil in the eyes of the Lord. This is Jeroboam's son. So after Jeroboam passed, his son became king, and this is what it says about him. Walking in the ways of his father, and in his sin, which he had caused Israel to commit. Now, let's fast forward 56 years. And we find Joram, son of Ahab, clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He did not turn away from them. Let's fast forward 11 more years. It says, Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel. However, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. The worship of the golden calves at Bethel and Dan. Finally, let's fast forward another 100 years. 200 years since Jeroboam's reign, and this is his legacy, is what it says. When he, God, tore Israel away from the house of David, they made Jeroboam, son of Nebat, their king. Jeroboam enticed Israel away from following the Lord and caused them to commit a great sin. The Israelites persisted in all the sins of Jeroboam and did not turn away from them until the Lord removed them from his presence, as he had warned through all his servants, the prophets. So, the people of Israel were taken from their homeland into exile into Syria, and they are still there at the time where 2 Kings is written. The damage and heartbreak that can be laid at the feet of Jeroboam is staggering. How does something like this happen? That's what we're going to try to learn. We can learn from the fall of Jeroboam, and we seem to find a progression that's talked about in the Bible. Here's what it says. Jeremiah writes, "These wicked people who refuse to listen to my words, who follow the stubbornness of their hearts, and go after other gods to serve and worship them." We find a progression then, and it seems to be this: tune out God, tune in self, turn from God. It describes people then in this passage going after other gods to serve and worship them. That's turning from God. But when you back up from that third step, you find a second step. It says they followed the stubbornness of their heart. So before they served other gods, they followed the stubbornness of their heart. And before they followed the stubbornness of their heart, it says they refused to listen to my words. Tune God out, tune self in, turn from God. And that's what we find with Jeroboam, son of Nebat as well. Let's do a little bit of background work so we can understand kind of how he comes to the place where he's able to have all this influence. Israel enjoyed a lot of power and prosperity when Solomon became king. David was his father. Solomon obtained the throne after David. He was a really good administrator and a very wise ruler, and Israel flourished under his reign. Jeroboam had been one of Solomon's officials, and he distinguished himself by his hard work and leadership. And so Solomon was looking for a place to actually put him in charge. So what he did, he put Jeroboam in charge of the labor force from two tribes that were in the northern part of Israel. Jerusalem and the capital were in the south. And then the northern part had more tribes. There were two tribes, and they put Jeroboam in charge of the labor that these tribes were to perform for Solomon. One of the downsides of Solomon's reign, it was just astonishing, building, but he put a heavy tax burden and work burden on the backs of the people. There were lots of things that he put into place, and people needed to do it. And so he taxed people and put them to work, and it was a heavy burden. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam became king. Jeroboam was up in that part of Israel, and here's what they did. They gave Jeroboam a message to bring to Rehoboam, who had just been installed as king after Solomon died. And here's what they told Jeroboam to tell Rehoboam in the south. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Lighten the tax burden, lighten the labor burden. If you do these things, we'll serve you. Rehoboam, he consulted some of his father's advisors, some of his own advisors, and this was his response. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I will make it even heavier. They did not want to hear that. So Jeroboam went back. They rebelled and made Jeroboam their king. They said, we want you to be our ruler. So Rehoboam is the king of the southern part of Israel at this point, and now Jeroboam is the king in the northern part of Israel. Jeroboam would put some things in place that would cause the northern kingdom to go into captivity, devastating. There's a lot of background. How did this happen? What we're going to do, we're going to take the end first. We're going to talk about the serving other gods, and he made the decision. Then we'll back up to find out why he did that, and then we'll back up one step further. Here's what happened. After seeking advice, the king, now this is Jeroboam, now he's in his reign, he's been ruling as king in the north, and he comes to this point where he has to make a decision. Here's the deal. After seeking evidence, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. It's a remake of the story of the golden calf that happened when Moses was leading the Israelites in the wilderness. The same kind of thing. The Arameans and Canaanites people, they saw their gods as mounted on the backs of calves and bulls. And so maybe, we don't know, Jeroboam said, well, it's not that bad to make a golden calf, just as long as you don't put a god on top of it. So we don't know why he did what he did, but he established these two shrines and said, these are your gods, O Israel. And this was a disastrous mistake that would affect Joram and Nadab, and 200 years later would cause the northern kingdom to go into captivity, to be almost eliminated. Why did he do this? Why go after and serve other gods like this? Well, here's what, now we're going to back up. So this is the act. And now we're going to back up a little bit and find what it was that preceded the act. And this is what we find. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. They went up to Israel because they were in a mountainous area. That means they go up. It's actually in the south, but they went up because it was on a mountain. And here's what Rehoboam thought. Okay, geez, I have a problem. God commanded the people to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year for religious festivals. It was part of the law. You had to actually save money. In fact, some of the tithe, you set aside a tithe so that you could support the Levites, you could give to the poor, and you could be saving money to be able to take these 3 pilgrimages to Jerusalem 3 times a year. So it was something that all the people were called and forced to do unless you were sick or yada yada. Jeroboam assumed, and this is what he thought, okay, if the people go to Jerusalem in the south, they'll want to stay there. Okay? And he feared if they pledged their loyalty to Rehoboam, they would return and maybe overthrow him. So he said, I know what I'll do. I will make a couple of places, it won't be like the temple in Jerusalem, but they will be able to stay home and worship in the comfort of a closer locale. Is that reasonable? No, the fact is, in some senses, there might have been something to be concerned about. Israel wasn't really used to civil war. David, they had been one kingdom, and then Solomon, they were one kingdom, and then Solomon gives the throne to Rehoboam, and then he decides to tax the people more, and then the kingdom splits, and now they're kind of in civil war. There's some border skirmishes. And so maybe he has some things to be concerned about. What ended up happening, he did listen to his fear, let it direct his actions, and he ended up building 2 holy places in the north and south part of the northern kingdom so that people wouldn't have to travel so far. Before we distance ourselves from such a decision, let's think about how fear moves us to make desperate decisions. Fear is a powerful motivator. When we're afraid of something, we naturally think about what we can do to minimize the threat, to minimize the risk. We don't ask to be afraid. It just comes to us. What if? Oh no. What if? Oh no. You have what ifs and oh no's, don't you? What What are you afraid of? I'm afraid of something. What if? Oh no. And that becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. We try to banish the fear, but it comes back. And it doesn't come back because you want it to. You wake up in the morning, bing, there it is. Or go to bed at night, bing, there it is. Fearful thoughts come over us. We seek to reduce them by controlling what we can control. I try to control myself, I try to control others, I try to control the world. Again, fear is a powerful motivator. Would you agree? Once fear is in place, it is very difficult to remove. Would you agree? Very difficult to remove. Because it's reasonable. Things might happen. They really might. And that's what Jeroboam thought. Things might happen. How do we, well, what choice do we have? What choice did Jeroboam have? His fear was real. He put this in motion because he was threatened. There's one step before. Here's what happens. Before Solomon died, God promised Jeroboam, before Solomon died, this is what God promised to Jeroboam. He said, see, I'm going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of David, my servant, and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, he will have 1 tribe. If you do whatever I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and commands, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David. And I will give Israel to you. What did God promise to Jeroboam? You will rule over 10 tribes. I will give you an enduring dynasty if you do what I command. These promises, if they were held on to, might have been useful in warding off the fear that Jeroboam considered when he thought of what might happen to the south. He says, what if they go down there and then they want to stay there and they come up and they try to kill me and take away my kingdom? Wait a minute. But God told you that I will give you an enduring kingdom, and I will give it to you, and it will be enduring as my father David. Jeroboam tuned out the promises. He tuned God out. And then he tuned himself in. What if? And then he turned from God. Why? Perhaps he was too busy focusing on his promises to God and not God's promises to him. That can happen, can it? Maybe he tried to remember the promises, but over time, the promises got littler and the problems got bigger and the promises shrank and the problems became big. We don't know why. All we know is that the consequences were disastrous. God does give us promises, and here's what it says. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. Through these, He has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. Most versions of the Bible include the word evil here in verse 4. It's the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. That word evil is included in the New International Version, the English Standard Version. A lot of versions include it. But it's not in the original passage. It's not in the Greek. What it says, the corruption in the world caused by desires, not just evil desires, desires in general. Is it bad to be safe? Do you want to be safe? See, the problem isn't evil desires. The problem is desires in general. What God gives us is promises, so that through the promises we participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by desires. Promises don't just squelch evil desires. Wanting to be safe is not bad, right? Not a bad desire. There's all kinds of desires we have, and yet, when we fear that we might not get them, we become desperate. And what can we do? What it says, God gives us his promises, so that through his promises, we can participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by desires. What it's telling us is that if we want some influence or ability to make good decisions in light of what might threaten us, grab onto promises and hold on tight. Because fear is very powerful, and all of us are going to be afraid. We're not talking about something that's going to eradicate fear. We're talking about something that is powerful enough to help us not be dragged away. And there's one thing: divine promises. That's it. By them, we participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by desires. How does this work? How does this work? Let's take here's a fear some of us might be familiar with, all of us are. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. The thought that money might not be adequate. What if? Oh no. What if? Oh no. The love of money, we understand what that's like. How do you battle that? Things might happen. Here's what it says. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. What it's saying in that thing, keep your lives free from the love of money. Be content with what you have. Be content with what you have. Don't let the love of money be the driving force. That's easier said than done. And that's why the verse doesn't stop there. Look where it goes in terms of giving us something that allows us, it gives us a how. Don't let money, the love of money, drive you. That's the what. But then it gives a how, and what do we find here? Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You know what the how is? A promise, and it's not magic. But to the degree we tune in the promise, the grip of fear, to the degree, this is not all or nothing, it's not black and white. To the degree we tune in the promise over years, thinking, being mindful of it, the grip of fear lessens a little bit. And it's not all or nothing, but that's how it works. As our trust in God increases, the grip of fear loosens. You've heard it before. What they do, I think I know they do it in Aboriginal cultures, how they catch monkeys. I heard that they take a coconut and cut a hole in it, hollow it out, and have the hole be just big enough so that the monkey can get their hand in the coconut. They put something in the coconut, something shiny, or a food item, and the monkey puts his hand into the coconut and grabs the item inside. But now cannot get his hand out because the opening is small enough for him to get his hand this way, but not big enough once his fist is clenched. And what they do then as well is they tie a rope around the coconut, and the monkey's hand is in the coconut, and they reel the monkey in because he won't let go of the thing in the coconut. And that's how you understand the principle. There is an occasion where that wouldn't work. Or, it wouldn't work. If they were on an animal preserve and the monkey got his hand stuck in the coconut, and the monkey identified as a caregiver, he had experienced being fed by this person. If that person extended his hand to the monkey, it's possible the monkey would let go of the food item and draw his hand out. Why? Because he associates the hand being reached out to him. That's a hand that's going to care for me. And so I don't need to grab onto this thing in the coconut, because this hand I have identified as a hand that will give me what I need. And you say that would be, can you really teach a monkey that? It's possible for a shepherd to teach sheep that. Voice recognition. The voice of the shepherd becomes safe, something to provide, and a shepherd can call to sheep, and the sheep will follow him. It's possible. But it takes a while. It takes a while. This is the legacy of Jeroboam. What do we learn from it? I would recommend this may be one way. So if the problem is tune out God, tune in self, turn from God, then the solution would be tune in God and not tune out self, because the fact is God knows that we have needs. We have need for food and clothing and drink and wisdom, so you don't tune yourself out. You might hear someplace, die to self. How in the world do you die to self? Eliminate your own selfish desires. That's not possible. Not possible. Tune in God, tune in self, then turn to God. That's why he says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Or to put it in just a very brief 2-point thing, develop the capacity to exhale your concerns and inhale his commitments. Exhale your concerns, inhale his commitments. Concerns, commitments, if you do that over time, there will be enough strength on the grip of those promises. Slowly it will allow us to loosen our grip on the things that we're afraid to let go of. Let's stand for closing prayer. Father, thank you for your promises. Through them we become partakers of the divine nature, escape the corruption in the world. We see Jeroboam, who made some really bad decisions, but those decisions basically were rooted in either forgetting your promise or just letting go. And we can understand that. Thank you for your promises. They enable us to participate in the divine nature. I'd ask that we would become good, be brilliant in the basics. Perhaps we become really good at identifying and being mindful of promises. Promises can't help us if we don't think about them. I'd ask that we might store away promises and think about them so that we could learn little by little to exhale our concerns and inhale your commitments. Thanks for the food that we have now, the opportunity to sit down and enjoy it together. In Jesus' name, amen.